Oh, no worries at all. No worries at all. We're like,
hold on a second. I must have you muted. Give me just a second. Hold on.
Can you hear me?
I don't. Okay, now I should be working.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Now
awesome.
Good.
Okay, awesome.
Like
well, we were just gonna chat about some of the questions that I had to get people's opinions on it, but we will just reset and start over again. So good evening, ladies. The Peloton Moms Book Club is thrilled to welcome Emily Henry for a chat with our group about your newest release, Book Lovers. Notice the ensemble, I tried to match the cover.
Oh my gosh, I love
it. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Jennifer Crowley for all she does for the group. Thank you, Jennifer. She was just helping me just now. Thanks to all the moms who have already read the novel and submitted questions in advance, have recommended it to their friends and in the group. Or perhaps you are tuning in after the fact to our YouTube channel or our podcast, which we are just going to start now. Because you couldn't join us live. So we appreciate you doing so. Last but not least, of course, I want to thank Emily for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. And I just wanted to share kind of a brief bio on you. So Emily is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of People We Meet on Vacation and Beach Read, as well as several young adult novels. You live in or around Cincinnati and also spend some time in Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati. And then your books have been featured as Book of the Month selections, BuzzFeed, in Oprah Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, the New York Times, of course, the Skim, Shondaland, and so many more places. And if you're not following her on Instagram, you should, because she's hilarious. Her handle is Emily Henry Writes. So welcome, Emily. And I just kind of wanted to start with, I believe your professional career started in publishing. So is it safe to say that you tapped into that experience as a resource when you wrote Book Lovers?
Well, I did have some internships with publishers and that sort of thing, but I had been working before this. I actually was working as a technical writer and I did some proofreading on the side. So I had, some minor connections with like the proofreading stuff. But really it was more just that since I had been publishing young adult novels for a few years, and I'd gone through, I don't know how much you all know about publishing, but it's like this very trans thing where like, I guess Nora kind of touches on this a little bit, but people are constantly leaving and coming and like going to different publishers because it's kind of the way that you can move up. It's like nobody will just really promote. You have to like go to a different publisher and leave your authors behind and all of that. So I had gone through, I think, 4 editors for my young adult career. And I'd had one agent who retired to focus on her own writing. And then I got a new agent. And so I kind of had a lot of interaction with a lot of different people and was really fascinated by that side of the business. And also my first agent was like quite a good friend. Like we got pretty close. Like she was pretty new when I signed with her and I was, brand new. And so we had like just a really lovely rapport. And like I said, she retired to focus on her writing. And then at that point she was like, oh, you should talk to my agent who represents my writing. And then I ended up talking to her. And now we both work with the same agent and we both publish with the same publisher. So yeah, I just had like a lot of the insight that I had was still through that author lens, but I also got close enough to my first agent that I knew like some of the woes. And also like, I'm a, pretty self-conscious person in a lot of ways. In some ways I'm not, but as far as like neediness, I think I'm very self-conscious. And so like writing about an agent, it was like, oh, I know, like, I know what they deal with. Like, I know what a mess I can be. And like all of my friends who are also neurotic writers, like I know what our group texts are like. I know the emails that they're sending their agents in the middle of the night. So that has always been like a really fun thing for me to think about. And I don't know if any of you all have read Beach Read, but in that book, the agent in that book was very much based on my first agent, Lana. And she really was this person who's like this total hard ass in her like day-to-day career life, but she also was working with really neurotic authors and knew we needed her to like be handling us with kid gloves and talking us down and pumping us up and all of that. Like, it was just a really fascinating thing to see this person who's so good at being like cutthroat when she needs to be, but she also does have this soft, tender side. And so when I decided to work on Book Lovers, I knew, like, I decided not to just take that agent character because I wanted to be able to start from complete scratch. But that was something that I knew was like a real thing. It's like agents are, it's like they're part lawyer and part therapist. And it's just such a weirdly specific job that I don't know if there's anything else out there that like really like matches up to what that job looks like.
Yeah, maybe I always say maybe a real estate agent, because they have to be so cutthroat, but then also have to deal with all the emotions and roller coaster.
Right, they have to convince you that, yeah, that just because like you have a lot of treasured memories in this home that's falling over, like you can't just sell it for $1 million. Yeah, that was actually what, as I was saying, at the only other job, I was like, real estate agent, but you don't typically work with that person for years at a time. And, you know, with an agent, the ideal situation is you stay with them until one of you retires. So you get like, it's a really weird, like personal / professional relationship.
Yeah. Well, you can probably see in the chat, I had asked that question. For most, this is not their first Emily Henry novel, so that's exciting to know always, I'm sure. Big fans. But you're speaking to a crowd of book lovers here, and you obviously are a book lover and a rom-com movie lover, because there were so many lovely references throughout this book. Have you always been an avid reader, and when did you fall in love with reading?
Yeah, I have always been an avid reader, and I think part of it is that I am also just like always a late bloomer with absolutely everything. And so I was like the last kid to learn how to read. And I also have this massive little sister complex where I just like need to be able to do what other people are doing. And my parents were always really voracious readers. And one thing that they did that's like the happiest memory from my childhood pretty much is like pretty much every single night they would sit at the end of the hallway between my room and my brother's room, and they would just read to us a little bit. And you know, they read like all the Chronicles of Narnia to us that way, and all the Lord of the Rings novels that way. And then when Harry Potter came out, like we all could read by then, but they were reading them too, so we read them that way. And just so many other books, all of the Jane Austen books. I think that was like my first exposure to them. So I've always loved reading. Like as soon as it clicked for me, that was just my favorite thing. And I was definitely the kid like staying up all night with the flashlight, like in the closet reading. But I hadn't ever read romance, weirdly enough. And I loved rom-coms films growing up. And like, those were just some of my favorite stories of all time, are just like the Nora Ephron and Nancy Meyer rom-coms. But I hadn't read romance at all. And I went to school for creative writing, and that tends to be like, it was a really good experience, but it does tend to be kind of like a little bit of a snobby experience too, where you're not really being encouraged to write anything that's like genre fiction. It's like, if you're here, like clearly you want to write literary fiction that will not be like shelved anywhere other than in just like fiction. And so I hadn't read any romance. And when I wrote Beach Read, it really was just like, I had been writing these YA novels. I was like very anxious and just struggling emotionally at the time. And I just thought like, oh, how nice would it be to sink into this really summery, warm rom-com, not just for like the 2 hours of watching a movie, but for like the months it takes to write a book. And so I really wrote Beach Read without any expectation, just because I wanted like a very elongated rom-com movie experience. And then after that, I was like, okay, I should be reading romance. Like I just wrote a romance novel and I don't even know if it is a romance novel because I'm not reading in the genre. And then once I think the first one that I read was Sally Thorne's The Hating Game, which is phenomenal. And at that point, I realized like that escape that I had been looking for in my writing, I could also just so easily get by finding a really good rom-com novel. And so because I was still just like in a very anxious place and just struggling to get into any of like the darker things that I normally had gravitated toward as a reader and a viewer and whatever. I just like binge read romance for like the next several years. It was like the only thing I could handle. And now I've started, reading more thrillers again and mystery novels and literary fiction and all of that. But for a couple of years, it was like the all romance diet.
Yeah. And, so I started this group pre-pandemic, but then really like in the height of the pandemic, I think a lot of times people were struggling to have focus.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people are always like saying, try a rom-com because it'll suck you right in and it's not so heavy and, it'll be an escape, exactly what you're kind of looking for and why you want to read. So, which actually is a segue into my next question. Did you write book lovers during the pandemic?
I did. It was the first book that I wrote, even the first draft in the pandemic. Like with people we meet on vacation, I had written a first draft before the pandemic hit. And so I was editing it, in this whole new world. And it was like, okay, we're not changing anything. We're not acknowledging this. Like, we're just going to kind of stick with what we've got. And with book lovers, we had the conversation that I think almost every author is having with their editor right now of like, do we engage with this or do we ignore it? And we were like, yeah. No, we need to ignore it. Let's just like give people this book where nobody's worrying about anything like that. But I will say, because it was the first book I was writing basically in total isolation, except for my immediate family, I had such a hard time with it because usually, you have all these new experiences coming in and you're living your life. And that's kind of what you write from, even though you're not writing your life. And with this book, I spent like the first 4 drafts, just it felt like I was crawling over glass to write the book. And I really just kept complaining to anyone who would listen about how unfunny it was. It was just like, I am not funny anymore because I'm not around people. And then like it finally kind of clicked and I finally shared it with my editor and she was like, this is hilarious, whatever. But I think, just because I wasn't around people, it was like, I have no idea if any of this is landing. And it really, until the book came out, I sort of was in this like gripping the edge of the seat, like, yeah, is anybody gonna like this even? So I've been really pleased that it has been like a good thing for so many readers.
Yeah, because I mean, that's what kind of my question, like, how obviously it must have impacted your frame of mind, and it's probably at times was pretty difficult to try to be writing about, light and fluff and, escape. Yeah. So it couldn't have been easy. And you sort of answered the question about like how long it took, but exactly how long did it take you? Was it like the whole pandemic or?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think. So normally in the past, when I've drafted a book, I tend to write a really, really sloppy, bad first draft. And then I'll go back and rewrite it like more slowly over, the next, it's like, I'll write a draft that takes a month and then I'll have some time away from it and I'll come back and I'll write a draft, I'll take that and I'll fix it and I'll work on it for like the next 3 months. And then it'll go back to my editor and I'll have it for a couple more weeks to a month and then back and forth. So that's kind of how it normally goes. But with this book, I think even the first draft took me a lot longer than it normally would. And by that, I mean, like I normally write this very bad first draft in like a month. And I think it probably took like 2.5 months. It was just like, every word was pulling teeth. And it really, like you said, it's just like nobody was in the frame of mind to do anything. I mean, I did have friends who were just instantly, making the sourdough and all of that. And I was just like, how are you doing this? I'm lying on my couch, staring at the ceiling, just kind of panicking.
Yeah, it was interesting how everybody kind of handled it and reacted. So, well, that you're like kind of segueing perfectly into all these questions for me. So thank you very much. We wanted to know if you map out your plot kind of in advance, or if you focus on the characters first and then you kind of develop the plot around the characters. And then also do you kind of just write intuitively if you don't map it out?
Yeah, so normally what happens is I'll have the idea for like the basic premise, and that usually starts with setting. Like I'm just like, oh, I want to tell a book or tell a story that's set here. With this book, it started with Nora. It was like Nora was very clear to me. Nothing else was clear. So I had her and I, knew what her basic storyline needed to be as far as like going to the small town. And I knew like why she was the way she was. I knew, why she loved her job and why she was anxious about not having her phone with her at all times and all of that. So that was just kind of just worked itself out before I started writing, when I was just in the early planning phases. And I don't usually write much down when I'm in that place. It's really just a lot of like staring at a wall and like letting things develop. But then once I have kind of like the basic premise, that usually will give me instantly like the loose idea for 2 or 3 scenes. And there will be a lot of times like even like a couple of specific jokes, like some dialogue that I think makes perfect sense for what would happen there. Like in Book Lovers, the date that she goes on with Blake, the guy that Libby tries to set her up with, it wasn't like concrete, oh, it's Blake, whatever. But as soon as I kind of had the premise and I knew what the conceit of the book was, that she's going to go have this small town experience, and it just is the exact opposite of that, I knew I wanted her to go on a date with like a local. And I knew that I wanted her love interest to be there, making it like even that much more humiliating, that she's here on this horrible date trying to like convince herself that she could be happy here. And this is like, you know, her new outlook on life. And so that was kind of one of the first scenes that was somewhat clear in my head. So once I have about 3 scenes, I really will just kind of dive in. I start at the beginning. I write 2,000 words a day. Sometimes that will take like an hour and a half. And sometimes it's like I start at 9 and I end at 9 p.m. It's all over the map. So I'll do that until I have the first draft. And the first draft is always very bloated with all kinds of scenes where nothing really happens. And characters will just like change their personalities partway through, and details of the town will change and whatever. And I just kind of make notes to go back to it. And so once I've got a full draft, I'll set it aside for a little bit. And then I'll kind of like make my own list of things I already know I want to fix. And then I'll read through and start doing that. And then it goes to my editor, who sends me like a long in-depth edit letter that tells me what she likes, where she has questions, what she thinks doesn't totally make sense. And, you know, like goes really in depth with the plot, the character arcs, all of that. And we just kind of go back and forth, like fine tuning it a little bit more every time one of us has it.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear everybody's process. And then we kind of talked about it, but well, do you ever think you'll go back to writing young adult? And then what do you think is the biggest difference between writing YA and writing rom-com? And we were chatting about this before you joined, and somebody's like, oh, well, you just get better at writing the sex scenes as a joke.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that is a fairly big part of the difference, because the thing to me was, when I was writing YA, the thing I really loved was the coming of age story. Like I really loved talking about these really important years in a person's life when, you know, they're just kind of questioning everything and who they are and how they fit into the world and all of that. And so I really loved doing that. But after I had done 3 books of my own and then 1 that I co-wrote with a friend, it really kind of felt like at that time, okay, I think I have said everything that I have to say about that kind of moment in life when things change for you, for the time being at least. And so when I wrote Beach Read, like I said, it was just sort of like on this whim, this thing that I needed. But I was really surprised how quickly this book that I set out to write as a romance turned into another coming of age story. And that, I think, is what ended up hooking me and keeping me in this space, was the excitement of writing about people in their late 20s and early 30s having that same process kind of happen again, where you're like, everything I thought I knew was wrong, and like I'm not who I thought I was, and my friends aren't who I thought they were, and my family isn't. Just that renegotiation of your place in the world, and how scary it is to get to that point when you kind of like as a kid think of like 30 is old when you're a kid. So old. And so to get to that point and be like, oh no, I still feel 16 years old, was something that was really fun to write about. And like I said, is what has kind of kept me here. And so with that said, I probably will write about teenagers again at some point when I feel like I have more to say. But right now I've been really loving that. And I assume that I will end up writing about women in their 40s and 50s and 60s as I get older, because I'm just realizing that all of life is just a constant coming of age, which is exciting.
That's true.
Yeah. And it's fun to just like be in, to watch my mom who's in her mid 60s and to be like, it's just, we're having the same experience. We're both having a hard time figuring out like what do we do next? Where are we supposed to be going? So yeah, it's really fun as a writer to realize that you're not going to like get bored of writing about people because you're going to keep learning new stuff.
Yeah. So for me personally, I think you stand out in the genre because of your wit and your banter that you are able to create between your characters. Like you always deliver multiple laugh out loud moments, at least for me, where I'm just like, that's hilarious. So how do you do that? Because like, do you kind of bounce that off your editor, like the banter? Because I mean, it's so conversational that you can't just, or maybe you are, but you can't just be writing that. Like, are you at least talking out loud as you're like talking to yourself?
I'm totally, yeah. I don't know if I'm saying it aloud, but I'm mouthing it. And I only know this because my husband will be like, even if I'm sending a text message, if somebody's like, I had a bad day, when I'm typing my reply, apparently I look like totally anguished. I'm just like empathizing so hard while I'm writing and I'm just whatever. So I do think that part of it is when I hear dialogue, I really do hear it being said. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff about writing where it's like, people will say, oh, my character just appeared and they started talking to me. And I'm not really that kind of writer. I'm like, I'm very much know I'm working while I'm doing it. I love it, but I know I'm like pulling something out or just forcing words onto a page to fix later. But with dialogue, it's the only thing where it's like I can just hear it. And so when I'm trying to, you know, give advice for newer writers who are trying to work on their dialogue, I do usually tell them to say it aloud, because I think if you don't naturally hear it, you're not going to hear the rhythm of that. And you're not going to like notice if that joke was way too long, or if that paragraph was so long and you need to kind of break it up in some way. And I don't know, I mean, the thing about dialogue in real life too, is that you just meet some people where you click so well and you just are your funniest, smartest self with them. And then you just love that person because every time you're with them, you're like, wow, we're just like having such a good conversation. And then there are people you meet who you really like even, and you're just like, I can't think of a single interesting thing to save my life. Like I've talked a lot about the time I did an interview where I just like brought up yogurt one too many times and then it ended up in the headline. And that's like the conversations you relive forever where you're like, why was I so boring? How could I not think of a single thing to say? But when I'm writing dialogue, it's like kind of embarrassing and sad, but true. But it really is like, I'm just setting up my own jokes over and over again. And so that part feels fairly easy, except when you're in a pandemic and you're not around people. So you just don't really know if you're funny at all. Like I only know I'm funny because I'm around people and they laugh. Like when I'm at home alone, it's like, I have no idea. And my husband's heard every joke I could ever make. And even my editor, like she will note things. Even like, you know, in this third book where it's like, this isn't even the first time she's caught me repeating a joke. She's like, you did basically that same thing. Like in People We Meet on Vacation, we had to pull that out because you did it in Beach Read and then you did it again. It's like, I don't know. It's just the joke that I would make in that moment. And so the character makes it. So it's the thing that I'm constantly working on, like how I can teach it to people. But I think honestly, it's just like watching too much TV and just being a pretty talkative person.
Yeah, that's awesome. But well, it's fantastic, and it's truly a gift. However you do it, because it's there's not very many people where I'm reading and I literally laugh out loud. So I so look forward to reading one of your books just because I know I'm going to laugh. And
I'm also going to put an author's name in the chat that you all may have read or maybe haven't read yet, but Vari McFarlane, if you're looking for another kind of like chick lit writer who will make you laugh aloud, she is one of very few people who just like consistently will like have me like snorting when I'm reading. So you should check
awesome.
Have it.
Well, when we get to the end, we're going to ask for your recommendations anyway.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. Yes. So when Nora finishes Dusty's book, she expresses how she prefers something with a hopeful ending as opposed to a story with a perfect happy ending. And so my question to you is, how do you prefer it? Like, what do you prefer?
I think when I'm picking up a book, I want that happy ending. And when I am really like moved by something and it stays with me forever, it usually is that hopeful ending. I think I'm a pretty sensitive person. And so I will do a lot to avoid feeling big feelings because I just feel like I feel them too much, too often and too easily. So I usually will be reaching for, you know, if I'm watching TV or reading something or whatever, I'll be reaching for the thing that I just know is going to make me feel so good. But a lot of times the things that just make me like sob without even really being able to explain what it is, you know, that has like got its hooks into me is something that's a little bit more bittersweet. And I know we're going to do recommendations at the end, but the last book that I read that was like that was Emma Straub's This Time Tomorrow. And everybody should read that one, especially if you love father-daughter stories, because that's really what that one is. And it is so beautiful, but it affected me.
Yeah, that is in my pile,
So
at
good.
the top of my pile to read. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And it's getting a lot of early rave reviews. So that's
it deserves
great. So
it. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
And
so we'll save that.
It's funny and fun too, but it's so real life, even though it's got like kind of this fantastical twist. It's this real life feeling in the best way.
Yeah, well, that's similar to you because I feel like your characters are really real. They're not.
Thank you.
Like, you feel like you could walk next to them on the street and be like, oh, that's just the character from the book.
Oh, so, that's the best.
What was your favorite scene in the book to write?
Ooh, I mean, this was a thing that while I was writing, I was like, I don't know if it's funny, but I really did love writing the community theater scene where Libby and Nora go and see the play, because I live in Cincinnati, but I live in kind of this weird little neighborhood that's so quirky and I like love it so much. And I just feel like that I haven't been in that exact scenario, but I have been in fairly similar scenarios where like I've taken friends to like, oh, there's going to be a dance concert in like the town hall or whatever. And it's just like the kind of thing where you can't make eye contact for the entire show because you're like, these people, like, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I am just so tickled and like love this so much. And it's like so good hearted and so ridiculous. And that scene, I just had a lot of fun writing and just knowing, you know, exactly how Libby and Nora would handle it, which is like Nora would not let up and Libby would be like on the verge of literally peeing herself.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a perfect segue to my next question, because Nora and Libby's memories of childhood are so different. Can you talk about that a little bit? Why you chose to?
Yeah, I'm so glad you latched onto that because I don't feel like everybody notes that, but I think that is such a common thing with family dynamics. When you have multiple siblings, everybody kind of gets their own role. And I don't think I was super aware of the dynamics in my own family until I became an adult and, you know, moved out and got married and everything. And then it's like, now when we're all together, I'm like, oh no, I'm the little sister again. This is terrible. But it is so interesting that it's like, you can have the exact same childhood, but you still didn't have the same childhood. And I have a couple of very close friends specifically who are older sisters to younger sisters. And I was drawing so much from their relationships with their sisters for Nora and Libby, and that kind of like parentification that happens where one person's being like protected on some level while the other person is kind of assuming the role of like their parent spouse or whatever, just kind of like smoothing the way. But what was really fun for me, I don't know if fun's the right word, but engaging and interesting to me in writing Libby and Nora's dynamic was the fact that when you are the person who's trying to hide what's going on, trying to protect your siblings, like maybe even to the extent that you convince yourself that nothing really is wrong. I don't know if those siblings, it's not possible. It's not possible to fully protect that person. They always kind of have a sense of what's going on. And again, like I was a younger sibling and I definitely had times that my brothers were trying to guard me and just kind of like, look over there, like other, pay attention to something else. Everything's fine. And I really appreciate that. And I think that's like a really like lovely kindness that siblings, try to give each other. But I also think it's a really important thing to work through as an adult, when you have to kind of like accept that like you cannot protect someone from the truth. not fully, like things will always seep in. And so it was really, I enjoyed writing that dynamic and seeing what Nora thinks Libby's experience was versus what her experience actually was, seeing Nora work so hard to just smooth the way for her.
Yes. Do you think that we'll ever see your characters from any of your novels again? Do you have plans to?
I wouldn't have thought so, but people have seemed very interested. And so I don't have plans right now, but maybe at some point. I think the big thing is I don't want to put characters through unnecessary trauma when I feel like they've already like earned their happiness as a couple. And so it would have to be like, I don't know. I think if I did, it would probably be a ways down the road, because I would want to feel like I could write a different stage of their life and know what the drama is there and what the like character arc would be.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about screen adaptations, because for the rom-com genre in general, it has shockingly been difficult. I don't really understand why. I mean, every time we're talking to an author in the genre, they're like, but what can you tell us? Because I believe all three are in the works, right?
I'm literally like never know what I'm allowed to say about anything.
Yeah, I know.
So the deal is like everyone, like you were just saying, it's like, it's so hard to get things made. But the other weird thing is you just get used to being like, well, this is probably just one more hoop that we've jumped through. And I just feel like you won't know until you're like sitting down to watch the movie and you like turn on Netflix or wherever and it's there. Like that is kind of the way that I'm taking it. But there are things happening. It's looking good. I literally don't know. Like I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but it's looking good at this point. So if people just keep reading, talking about them, hopefully it will happen. But like you said, it's like, it seems like such an obvious thing. They're like famously cheap movies to make compared to other genres. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, it's fun. It is funny though. I mean, it's like you talked about Nora Ephron, and
I
mean, it was all we watched. So
and we're still watching them because we're not getting enough of them. So it's like every fall I'm still turning on You've Got Mail and When Harry Met Sally, because it's like you're not seeing that same level of rom-com coming out every year at this point.
No, for sure. All right, well, so let's just play the pretend game. Like, would you have some dream casting? Will you be involved in the casting if you can? And you talked about, you kind of verbalize some of your banter. Do you visualize characters?
I do not, and I would love for people to. So I don't really visualize characters. That's why you'll notice I'll like key into like 2 traits that a person has and just keep repeating them, because it's like they're just a blur in my mind. And so I just have to kind of have little facts. And I actually have had an interesting conversation with a lot of authors where I'm like, I don't know what my characters look like, but I know exactly where their refrigerators are, even if they never go into the kitchen. And so many other authors have been like, yeah, me too. I can't picture my characters, but I know the exact layout of their kitchen. So I don't really have that dream cast, but I love to see what other people think. So if people want to put it in the chat, that's always really fun. I've seen a lot of people pitching Oscar Isaac for Charlie, and I think that would be really fun. But I also think if anything gets made, they'll probably try and skew younger. So it'll probably be a bunch of actors who I don't know anyway.
All right, well, I don't know let me just see who voted for that. Emily Poss, yes, I am with you, girl. Harry Styles for Gus. Yeah,
I would love that. And I feel like he's so huge, and so I'm sure it'd be very expensive, and that might be the entire budget for the movie. But also he doesn't seem like a snob, so I feel like he wouldn't be like, oh, I'm too fancy to be in a rom-com. We just have to get Olivia Wilde to direct it, and then he'll do it.
Exactly. Perfect. That could work. So what are you currently working on? Is there anything you can share on that front? Any sort of sneak peek that you can give us?
I have just started, I haven't even been posting anything super concrete on Instagram. So I have just started kind of lightly teasing something about my next book, which is that there is kind of a fake dating component to it. However, before people get too excited, if that's your favorite trope, I'm working on finding more ways to make it funny at this point, because I think I have this problem where I'll like be like, oh, I want to write this book and this is the trope and this trope is so fun. And then I just like, my brain comes up with the saddest possible version of it. So then I have to kind of tune it back a little bit. So there is another rom-com. It's supposed to come out next summer. I'm working furiously to make that actually happen as I kind of rewrite it and try and get it to where it needs to be. But I'm excited about it. It feels like, I think every time I write a book, then it's like, while I'm writing that, there are these little holes in that book where I am curious to then kind of go to that place that I didn't get in that book. And so this next book is not about shepherds, so don't take it as that, but I did kind of want to take a shepherd-esque character too and be like, okay, well, now that we've given like, you know, Snarky City Charlie his happy ending, maybe we can investigate this other very, very nice man who is not Charlie Lastra.
Awesome. Well, we will anxiously await the next release. So tell us what you are currently reading and recommending.
Well,
I know we kind of touched on a couple of things, but and actually also just to follow up, someone wanted to know what your favorite Jane Austen novel was.
Ooh, okay. So I think I always go back and forth, and I feel like it's like whatever I've most recently read or like watched the adaptation of. But lately I have just been thinking so much about Persuasion, because it's like, you know, it's like the happy ending that you like wish she had gotten. And it's just like a little bit angstier and a little bit older and more mature. And I really love that. And then I was telling someone that in an interview, and then they told me that there's like about to be a new Persuasion adaptation on Netflix. So I'm very excited for that. But I love all of them. And, you know, like what I was saying about like kind of the little holes in things that then I want to investigate in the next book. I really love how in Jane Austen's books, it's sort of like Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice, I feel like are almost like the same sisters in a way, but it's sort of like Sense and Sensibility, I feel like is like a little bit more at like the older sister Eleanor's story, and the, you know, more serious, like quiet one. And then like Pride and Prejudice very much feels like Lizzie's story to me. So I think that's like a fun thing that she did, where she's like, oh, now I want to write about this person.
Yeah, I don't know. All right. And then, so, but what are you currently reading and recommending besides Emma? And
Yes. Yeah. Let me look. So this book came out last year. Real by Kennedy Ryan is really good. And it's like, you know, if you like romance, but you also want something like a little bit that feels like maybe a little bit more meaty than the average romance, Kennedy's books are fantastic. The writing is really like lush, and her characters really do feel so real, and everybody is so complicated and damaged, but it's like the best of humanity. So that's like not really a rom-com. It's very much like a romance. But that's a super beautiful one. Now I'm looking over at my shelves. Oh, coming out in a couple of months. I think it's not till August, but to get on your radars is Julia Whalen's new book, Thank You for Listening, which is about audiobook narrators. And it's a love story, and it's so sexy and funny and smart. And I love Julia's writing, and she's also my audiobook narrator. So she's someone that I have just avidly followed her career, and her first book was amazing, but this one like blows it out of the water. So that's another one I want everybody to be like watching for.
Yes, we were talking about before you joined. So I listened to the people we meet on vacation, and Julia just did a fantastic job.
Incredible.
And actually sneak peek, but she'll be joining us in July with another author that she narrates for, and kind of plugging her book. So that's awesome that you just plugged her, because she's fantastic and we love her.
Yeah, she is amazing. She's like the audiobook queen, I really believe.
Yeah, I can't really wait to learn more about the process and how they go about it, and pivot on the voices and the intonations, and is it all recorded and then cut? Oh, I can't wait to learn about it.
Really fun behind the scenes like peek, and I don't think she even knew how much people were going to be like fascinated by that. And I was like, no, I just instantly was like, tell me everything, and just like I won't tell you anything about it, because you'll get to read all about it in just a couple months.
Yeah. Were you involved in selecting her at the beginning?
I was, because so what happened was she was randomly paired. I mean, I don't know how it happened. I don't want to say randomly. didn't have a say in my YA audiobooks when there were audiobooks for my books. And we got paired up for my second book, A Million Junes, which is a father-daughter story. And so she did a phenomenal job, and we like really just kind of briefly connected, and then found out that we had a close mutual friend who she did audiobooks for as well. And so then when Beach Read was coming out, I actually had read Julia's debut novel, My Oxford Year. I was trying to remember what it's called. My Oxford Year, which is so good. And so, and it might make you cry, but I sent Beach Read to her to see if she would want to read it and give a blurb for it. And so she did, really graciously. And then I think at that point she was like, if you want, like, I will do the audio for it. And I was like, yes, please. And then basically every single time they just kind of check in and they're like, we just want to make sure you still want Julia, right? And I'm like, yes, as long as her schedule will allow it, like Julia Whalen for every single book ever.
Yeah, for sure. She's amazing. So yeah, we're looking forward to chatting with her, and she does such a good job with your banter. So
I know. I mean,
really
you can
perfect.
tell she has that like very, I mean, I guess they all have an acting background, but she just really does have such a strong knack for humor specifically, which is so hard to find. And
staying like on track with the changes to voice, yes. You know, yes. Like consistency throughout, you know. So I feel like some narrators kind of
dip in and
the slip.
Like now you have a Cockney accent for some reason. Yeah,
but she does an amazing job. So, well, it was an absolute delight chatting with you, Emily. This was so fun. We will definitely continue to recommend book lovers to everybody this summer. And we wish you so much success, and we will anxiously await news of anything for the screen, and cross our fingers for you. And hopefully next summer you'll be back to join us to chat about whatever's coming up next.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you so much for having me. And again, I'm so sorry for the weird sign-on thing. I'm so glad it worked out, and you all were wonderful. And I see all of your messages in the chat, and I just really appreciate all of you being here and all your kind words.
Yeah, I hope you take a second to read them all, because everybody's like 4-star, 5-star, everybody love.
Oh, that's awesome.
So,
thank you.
It's always good to hear good things every once in a while, right?
Oh yes, we need that.
Absolutely. Well, have a wonderful evening. Thank you, ladies, for joining, and we will see you soon. Have a good night.
Good night.